Everything you need to know about spellcasting in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, Part 2, because there's that much stuff. I'm Archon, this is Archon's Academy on Press 1 for Fireball. Let's get started.
Press 1 for Fireball.
Today the topics I'm going to cover are Concentration, Counterspell, Dispel Magic, Casting Limitations, Permanent Casts, Meta Magic, and Wizard Spellbooks. First, let's go over Concentration. Certain spells require concentration to maintain their effects, so you have to be thinking about them, you have to hold a part of your brain on this spell, or you have to be chanting whatever it is. You have to be concentrating on the spell to keep the effect up. Mechanics of that: you can only concentrate on one spell at a time. Casting another concentration spell breaks the first one. Again, spells will tell you if they are concentration or not. On D&D Beyond, you'll see it. It's like a little C and I think a diamond for concentration. However, casting a non-concentration spell will not break that. So if you're casting one concentration spell, such as Hold Person, and you are concentrating on it and you cast another concentration spell, you drop concentration on Hold Person and start concentration on the new spell. However, if you were casting Hold Person and concentrating on it and you cast a spell such as Fireball, which is a non-concentration spell, you can do that. So you can maintain your concentration and cast another spell that's non-concentration. Taking damage. When you take damage while concentrating on a spell, you must make a Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration. The DC of that equals 10, or half the damage taken, whichever is higher. The damage is the total for that one hit. So if there's a couple different types of damage on it, you total that damage for that one hit, and then you would half it. So anytime you take damage of 22 or higher, the DC becomes 11 or higher, depending on how much damage you took. There are environmental factors that can also require you to make a concentration saving throw, such as extreme weather, if you fall or someone tries to break your concentration. That's generally something that requires some kind of action for them to do. But basically, if they do anything or anything happens to you while you're concentrating that would break your concentration, typically you're going to be required to make a Constitution saving throw of the before mentioned 10 or half the damage, whichever is higher, if you take damage. Some examples of concentration spells are Bless, Hold Person, and Invisibility. Next, let's go over Counterspell. Counterspell allows you to interrupt another caster's spell. The mechanics of that are it has a range of 60 feet, and you have to be able to see them. So one way, if you know an NPC or an enemy has Counterspell, to still cast spells while they're around is to hide from them while you're doing it. Now, if you have to see them to be able to cast your spell, you would have to do something like go invisible. Certain times you can hide, but basically for Counterspell to work, they have to be able to see you, and you have to be within 60 feet of them. This is an instantaneous reaction, so you use your reaction to cast Counterspell when you see a creature within the 60-foot range casting a spell. Other reactions are things like opportunity attacks. So if you use Counterspell, you cannot make an opportunity attack. Though typically if you have Counterspell, you're not the type of player or character who would be making an opportunity attack anyway. But that's more of just something that happens. That's not a rule. There is an automatic success for lower level spells. If the spell is 3rd level or lower, it is automatically countered. Counterspell itself is a 3rd level spell. So if the spell being cast that you are trying to counterspell is 3rd level or lower, it is automatically countered. For higher level spells, if the spell is 4th level or higher, you make an ability check using your spellcasting ability. So I covered that in part 1. That would be usually your wisdom, charisma. The DC equals 10 plus the spell's level. So for a 4th level spell, that would be a DC of 14 and higher. On a success, the creature spell fails. You can also upcast the spell to an equal level or higher level. Now, Limitations to this: if you cast Counterspell at 3rd level and the DM reveals that the level of the spell was higher, you still use your spell slot to cast Counterspell, and their spell still succeeds. That's why sometimes you either have to, outside of you would get the chance to make the check. So, assuming it's higher, you would still make the check. The DC would be 10 plus the spell's level. But sometimes it is better just to upcast Counterspell if you know the opponent is a strong spellcaster, to not even leave it up to chance. Just take them out if you can. But those are the mechanics of how Counterspell works. If it's 3rd level or lower with a normal casting of Counterspell, Counterspell automatically beats it. If it is a higher level than you cast Counterspell at, you have to make the ability check save using your Wisdom, Charisma, or your Intelligence. The DC equals 10 plus the spell's level that it was cast at. Alternatively, you can upcast Counterspell to an equal or higher level. Next, let's go over Dispel Magic. Dispel Magic allows you to remove magical effects that are currently in place. The mechanics of this is it has a range of 120 feet. Now, this one does not have the restriction that you have to be able to see it, but generally you have to know something is there. I mean, you can cast Counterspell or Dispel Magic just in an area, but it only has the restriction of the range of 120 feet. The effects of this: choose one creature, object, or magical effect within the range. If it is a spell of 3rd level or lower, it ends. For higher levels, much like with Counterspell before, you would either make the ability check using your spellcasting ability, or the DC equals 10 plus the spell's level. On a success, the spell ends. Additionally, you can upcast the spell to an equal or higher level, same as with Counterspell. The difference with Dispel Magic is, let's say you cast it at 3rd level, you find out from the DM that the magic you are trying to dispel is higher than that. You would still use your spell slot for casting Dispel Magic, but you get the opportunity to cast Dispel Magic at a higher level after that with another spell slot if you have one, because it's not an actively being cast spell as with Counterspell. So it's not a reaction. Assuming you don't trigger the spell with your first casting of Dispel Magic, usually you get to try again with this one. However, it does take a spell slot each time. Next, I want to go over casting limitations, and this is something that is a balance mechanic of the game. So in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, a spellcaster can only cast one leveled spell per turn. The explanation of this is that in your action economy, you can cast one leveled spell as a bonus action. If you also cast an action spell, it must be a cantrip. And that works the other way too. If you cast a leveled spell as an action, I don't think there's many, but there's very few bonus action cantrips. Those would be the only ones you could cast on that turn. An example of this is if you cast Healing Word, which is a 1st level spell that you can upcast, as your bonus action, which it is a bonus action spell, you can only cast a cantrip as your action, such as Firebolt, Prestidigitation, Thaumaturgy, any of those. This rule ensures that spellcasters cannot cast multiple powerful spells in a single turn, maintaining game balance. So really, this is just a balance thing. There are ways around this, which I'll go over a little bit later in the game, but this is one of the ways to not make spellcasters just so OP that it's not for anyone, including them. If you become too strong, it becomes not fun. So this is just a balance mechanic where you can only cast one leveled spell per turn. Base rules. Next, let's go over permanent spells. Some spells can be made permanent through repeated casting or special rituals. Again, the spell will tell you if it has this ability, and it will tell you what those are, but as a general rule, it's usually just repeated casting. Some mechanics of this are extended casting time. Sometimes it requires longer or repeated casting, so over so many days or so much time. The cost typically involves a specific cost in gold or other resources. Usually it's pretty high. A permanent spell is usually a stronger one. Again, the spell will tell you what it is, but typically these spells require higher cost. Conditions typically involve special conditions or specific conditions, some rituals, something done to maintain the permanence. Again, the spell's going to tell you, but these are just kind of the general rules that these spells generally follow. An example is Forbiddance. If you cast Forbiddance every day for 30 days in the same location, the spell lasts until dispelled, and the material components are consumed on the last casting. The materials you need for this are a sprinkling of holy water, rare incense, and a powdered ruby worth at least 1,000 gold. Now, we covered in part 1 using a spell focus. This would be one case where the spell focus can cover the holy water and the rare incense, but it cannot cover the powdered ruby both during the 30 spell castings, but also to consume at the end. So you would need to get one powdered ruby worth at least 1,000 gold. You would have to have that every day while you're casting the spell, and on the last day after you cast it, the powdered ruby is consumed with the spell, and Forbiddance becomes permanent in the area that you cast it. There are other examples, this is just one, but these are the general rules that permanent spells follow and a specific example. Next, I want to go over meta magic. Sorcerers can alter their spells with meta magic for enhanced effects. The mechanics of this are this uses sorcery points to fuel their meta magic. Each has its own cost, and again, these are each going to tell you, but some examples of meta magic include Subtle Spell, which is when you cast a spell, you can spend one sorcery point to cast it without any somatic or verbal components. So if you are holding your staff, which would be your spell focus, or your wand, or whatever it is, your amulet, which you can see in my example here, she's wearing an amulet or a brooch that she uses as her focus. She can cast this spell without somatic, without saying anything. I mean, somatic is moving your hands. Verbal is saying anything. So she doesn't have to move her hands, and she doesn't have to say anything. So this is a way to get around Counterspell. This is also a way to cast a spell in secret. I covered in part 1 that you normally cast a spell at a normal speaking volume if it has verbal components. Using Subtle Spell meta magic as a sorcerer is a way to get around that. There's also Extended Spell. When you cast a spell that has a duration of 1 minute or longer, you can spend one sorcery point to double its duration, up to a maximum duration of 24 hours. And Quicken Spell is another example. When you cast a spell that has a casting time of 1 action, you can spend 2 sorcery points to change the casting time to 1 bonus action. This is a way to get around the spellcasting economy that I just covered with the spellcasting limitations. So you can use your sorcery points to change a spell with a casting time of 1 action to a bonus action instead. So you can move a leveled spell or a cantrip to the bonus action category, and then you would have your action to cast the other. Those are just some examples. There's a bunch more, and they keep getting added as more expansions come out, but those are some examples of meta magic and how it works. Lastly, Wizard Spellbooks. A wizard spellbook is a personal collection of spells that they have learned by leveling or copied into their book. This makes wizard spellbooks valuable, sometimes extremely valuable, and important to them. I do know there are some homebrews that remove this rule. Sometimes that does make sense, if your players are never going to be around some of the conditions that I'm going to go over. Sometimes it does make sense to remove this rule, but I like keeping a version of this rule in because as a wizard, you don't need armor. You typically can't wear it. You don't need weapons. You typically can't use them. But this makes your spell book valuable to you. And for me, it involves a lot of character roleplay and character building. As you level, as your character grows, so does your spell book. And you could end up in a scenario where your spell book is very expensive. And not only do you need it to cast your spells, but it's worth a lot of money. So, how do you add spells? The cost is 50 gold and 2 hours per spell level of the spell that you're copying into your book. Now, there are various sources. A typical one is just a spell scroll, but there's, you could find it on a wall in a cave, or someone could have a recording of one, or whatever it is. But typically it's a spell scroll, but any sort of thing that you could copy, it would be 50 gold and 2 hours per spell level. Now, I have a player playing a wizard, and I came up with a homebrew rule that I like and so far has worked out for him. Optionally, it's have the player roll the d50. On a virtual tabletop, you can do that manually. If you don't have that, you just roll a d100, divide it by 2 per spell level, and that's what it costs. So He just had to do this for a level 1 spell. I believe he rolled an 8 or a 12, and that's all it cost for him. Now, wizards also, depending on the school they're in, this cost will go down by half. The wizard subclass will tell you that. It will go into more detail, but if you are a divination wizard, per se, and you copy a divination spell into your book, the cost is halved, and I believe the time is halved as well. But that's typically how it works. 50 gold and 2 hours per spell level. I have them roll a d50 and still have the 2 hours. And the cost represents, you're not just putting gold into your book. The cost represents the time and the materials to research the spell, to copy it into your book, to make sure you're getting it right, that you have all the incantations, all the inflections, all the specific wording. There's actual cost to it, and that's why I like having something to do here. It involves some role play for the wizard. It involves, character building. So that's what it is cost-wise. Now, it also requires an Arcana check to successfully copy it in. Again, this is to make sure that you did it correctly, that you got the words right, whatever it is. The DC is 10 plus the spell's level, which you roll at the end of the time. On a success, you copy it into the spellbook. Even at this sounds kind of high, but even at a low level, a wizard is typically intelligence-based, and an Arcana check is an intelligence-based ability check. Typically, the wizard's going to be pretty good at this, but this does leave, the air of mystery at the end that they might not have got it correct. Again, I like these. They do seem a little harsh to some people, but I like these for the character building aspect of it. My homebrew rule has found some middle ground where sometimes it is going to cost him the full amount, but usually he's going to be saving money on copying spells into his book. Thank you. That's part 2 of everything you need to know about spellcasting in D&D 5e. If I forgot anything, if you would like a better explanation of anything, please let me know in the comments below. You can visit me at www.pressoneforfireball.com and everything from my profile. You can find me on Twitch, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Those are all at Press1forfireball. Please subscribe and turn on notifications for future lessons. And I have 8 campaigns I'm writing right now. Some of them are about to start. I do have open seats. They are very good. They are very lore heavy. One of them is a wizarding school, a spellcaster school. So if you've ever wanted to do that, please check that out. But find me on startplaying.com. And again, thank you.